Most Photoshop users will be aware of the free transform tool. If we go down to free transform or Command T, we have the ability to adjust the size of images and squish and pull the pixels of those images around. But the problem associated with this kind of resizing is, as you'll notice with the children in the shot, they too get squished and pulled around when we're actually trying to reformat or reshape the photograph itself. Now sometimes the composition that you have selected in camera is not suitable for the use that you want to work with this particular image. Say for instance if we wanted this image to work within a square format rather than a horizontal rectangle format. In CS4 we have another option for transforming called Content Aware Scale, and if I select that we get the same kind of adjustment handles on the edge of the image, but notice as I'm moving it in, only parts of the picture are being scaled. So specific pixels are being pushed and pulled around, whereas other pixels are being protected. Now, without doing anything to this image at all, we've managed to maintain the shape and the aspect ratio of the two children while we've been pushing and pulling the other pixels around. What happens if we try and do something like extend the size of this image? So I'm going to go down and just use the crop tool now just to make this image a little bigger, and maybe this way as well, so we get a bit more canvas to play with. Now let's go in and select the Content Aware Scale option again and do something like pull this image upwards. Notice that one child is actually being protected, the other one is actually being stretched as we're making the change. So that's not going to work. Let's have a look what other options we have to try and control what's being adjusted and what isn't being adjusted. Notice up on the options bar we have a small person icon here that if we select, it should be able to protect skin tones. And yes, you'll notice that this part of the child is not getting stretched and the legs aren't getting stretched, but still in the middle is being stretched. So that's not going to work either. The other way that we can work with us nominating the specific part of the image that we want to be adjusted and the specific part of the images that we don't want to be adjusted is to actually provide some masking to the photo itself. So let's just open up the channels here, palette here, and we'll go to the quick mask tool, and I'm just going to select the brush and just brush over the parts of the picture that we want to remain the same. So in this instance we want to brush over both the children and the relationship that they have to each other. Make sure it's fully covered. Okay. We want to invert that mask because this is just putting a mask over this area, it's not actually selecting that part. So just Control I to invert, or Command I to invert, so everything else is selected. But then go back to RGB, so the quick mask isn't active anymore, and hide it as well. It's still there, and you'll notice that when we go to Content Aware Scale, we can go up to Protect and down to Quick Mask now, and select that as the option that we have for protecting the parts of the image. Let me just turn off the people, do that once more. So as we move this up, you'll notice that using those masks, the children and the pixels that are used to depict those children have remained the same. If we pull it this way as well, let's see what happens as we go sideways. They remain the same in the image. So we've been able to isolate those particular parts and keep the rest of the image moving around in order to reshape the picture according to how we want to fit it within, say for instance, a layout. In CS3 we saw some big changes with the photo merge utility, that is the utility used to stitch overlapping images like the ones you see on screen together to form a panoramic photo. In CS4 we see a couple more changes added to this utility. One is the ability to stitch together multiple images to create a full 360-degree view. So here we have some photos taken in a room, and you'll see that they've been overlapped and they've been photographed using a special pano head degree view that enables you to ensure consistent overlap as you spin around and take the series of photos. So there's 14 images altogether, and I'll just select all of those to start with inside Bridge and then go up to Tools, down to Photoshop, and you notice one of the options that we have in Photoshop is to load files into the Photoshop layers. I'll do this even though we could also go to the Photo Merge option, and I'll just show you how to work this particular utility using this option. So we'll open up these images into Photoshop and load them into a single document, all the different images laid up in a single document. Okay, so now if we have a look at the layers palette, you'll see that we have all the images layered up together in a single document. If we go and then multi-select all of those images, hold down the Shift key and select the first one, hold down the Shift key and then select the last one, we can then go up and you'll see that the Photo Merge utility is broken into two different features or two different functions. Here we have align layers and then we have blend layers, and this was something that was introduced in CS3 and enables us to actually work with these two different components of the Photo Merge utility separately. So let's look at aligning the layers first. We'll get the new Photo Merge or Auto Align Layers dialog, and notice that we have another option here as well, which is called Spherical Projection. So we'll choose that one because that's the one where we want to allow for a full 360-degree view. We also have the options here for removing vignettes for wide-angle lenses, and also correcting for things like barrel distortion or pin cushioning or fisheye distortion using geometric distortion correction here. I'm just going to click OK and let this process go. And what Photoshop is doing is it's pulling all the images into a stitching kind of space and looking for particular parts of the images that overlap and creating a new document or a new layer which has all of these images stitched together. And there we have it. So this is the reason why I wanted to actually do this as a separate step, just to show you how well it's stitched all of these images together and how it's done that by identifying the different parts of the photo and then finding where that common part is on the next photo. But look at the differences we have here between the color of the wood between these two consecutive shots. So when I was photographing this image, I actually used the auto white balance setting, and so there was a change in terms of the white balance between the two images. Now this could be a problem if you don't have a way of dealing with this kind of difference. Also, if you don't have a way of dealing with difference in exposure between all of the images as well. The exposure is not too bad on this group of images, but the changes in the Photo Merge utility can also account for changes in exposure as well as color as well. So let's go back, make sure all our layers are still selected in the layers palette, and then we'll move over to the edit menu again, and this time go down to Auto Blend. Notice we have two options with Auto Blend now. One is for stacked images, so if you're creating a large depth of field image then from several source photos, then you'd use the stacked image selection. Here we're working with panorama, and we want to make sure that we have seamless tones and colors selected as well. Click OK, and again I'll let that run through. And there you go, and you can see how Photo Merge has gone through and adjusted colors, adjusted tones in order to get a seamless transition across the whole of the image. So that's one of the new features that's available in CS4. Let's look at another feature that's available in CS4 for Photo Merge as well. So let's just close down that image and we'll flick back to Bridge, and inside Bridge you'll notice that I actually have two photos in a sequence, shot in a sequence. They're both shot with a fisheye lens, and you can see the distortion that's in the images as a result of that. Let's open these up into Photoshop to start with. So I'm going to do this a different way. I'm just going to right click on the images themselves, and I'll just go open with Photoshop CS4. Okay, again we've got the two images now open inside Photoshop. This time, instead of loading them into a single document using Bridge, I'll show you where you can do that using the menu options in Photoshop. We go down to Scripts, and then we can just go Load Files into Stack. So we can add open files and click OK. We could also attempt to auto align here as well, but I'd like to show you how to do that as a separate process. So the images are actually loaded into a new document, and they're loaded as two different layers. You can see those here. So let's multi-select those layers. I'll just close down the other documents that we had open, only because this is quite a memory intensive process. We want to make sure we have as much memory available to Photoshop as possible. So they're both selected. We go down to Edit, down to Auto Align Layers. Now notice if I select the auto projection, automatically you can see here in the notification area that it knows that I was shot these images with a Nikon D3 and that I was using a 16mm f2.8 fisheye, and that fisheye compensation has automatically been enabled, which is terrific. So let's just click OK and get those two images to start to be aligned together. Now there's a specific group of lenses that Adobe is working with in terms of identifying fisheye lenses, and you can find out that detail on the website. But the major companies like Nikon and Canon, it identifies the fisheye lenses for those particular companies. So I'll let that process run. And there you have it. And you notice that automatically we've had some of the barrel distortion that was in the image removed because of the geometric correction that goes on inside PhotoMerge now. Let's have a look at all the image there. Notice that I haven't blended the two images together, but let's go and do that now. So we'll just go down to Auto Blend, make sure we've selected Panorama, click OK. Let that process run through, and there you see the result. Now after a little bit of playing around, we can do things like crop, do a little bit of rotation in order to get what is a curved horizon but get it more horizontal, that sort of thing. Use the new clone stamp tool in order to fill in some gaps that you see here. We'll end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Notice that I've also made use of the new improved dodging and burning tools in order to bring some more drama to the sky as well. So try those new tools out in PhotoMerge. Working photographers using both Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw to manipulate their RAW files can get caught up with not having the adjustments they make in one program being reflected in the other. So let's look just at a couple of different things that you can do to ensure that if you make a change in Adobe Camera Raw, it's seen in Lightroom or vice versa. First thing to do, and I think it's probably a good way to work, is to convert your files to DNG. Now you can do this at the time of import, and you can do it at the time of import into Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw using the Adobe Photo Downloader. You see here we have an option called Convert to DNG. So this means that as the files are being pulled in from your card or your card reader or your camera, you can actually convert to DNG on the fly. Second thing to do is to make sure that both packages are actually updated to their latest versions. This will always help to ensure that both Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom are reading the same type of metadata for the changes that you make to those images. Next, in Bridge, what we need to do is go into the Camera Raw Preferences dialog and make sure that we save image settings to XMP files. These are little sidecar files that sit alongside the photo itself and allow you to keep those settings associated with the image. Also, we'll make sure that when we're working with DNG files that we update embedded JPEG previews as well. So make sure that's turned on. If we then flip over to Lightroom, let's look at the changes that we need to make in Lightroom as well. So in Lightroom we go down to the catalog settings, and in the catalog settings just make sure that the automatically write changes to XMP is actually selected as well. So let's now flick back to Bridge and make a change to this image and see what happens in terms of the update. So all we're going to do is open this file in Camera Raw, and then I'm going to go to the HSL Grayscale tab and just put the color back into the photo. Click Done. Automatically you'll see that the preview is updated, as also is the thumbnail updated. Now if I go back through to Lightroom, you might think to yourself that it would automatically update here. But one thing that we need to do is go to Metadata and go down to Read Metadata from File. This ensures that we're reading any changes to metadata that has been made to the image by another program. You can see it's been updated here. The same thing occurs if we actually make a change inside Lightroom. So if we pull this into the Develop module and we click on Grayscale, then what we can do is ensure that when we go to the metadata menu, we go down to Update DNG Preview and Metadata. So it's actually updating the preview for this DNG file and the metadata associated with the photo itself. So now the file has been updated again, and if we click back into Bridge, you'll see it has changed back to just the monochrome that we started with. One of the enhancements around the Photo Merge utility is the ability to create an image with large depth of field from a series of shots with shallow depth of field. Take for instance this example. Notice that it's been photographed at f1.4 or a very wide aperture at a shutter speed of a 1/15 of a second. So typical type of shot that you would take in low light. Notice that only a portion of the image is sharp. But if I move across and show you the different shots in the sequence, you'll notice as I focus into the image that the focus actually moves through the photograph and gradually sharpens different parts of the images right into the background. So across the whole scene I actually have, across the whole series of photographs, I actually have the whole scene sharp. But we need to pull out the sharp sections from each of the shots and stitch them together. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we'll select all of the images, then we'll go up to Tools, down to Photoshop, and then into Load Files into Photoshop Layers option. This will open the images up in a single document and will load each of the images as different layers into that document. So now if we look at the Layers palette, you'll see that we have all the images sitting there stacked up together. The next thing we need to do is to actually align these images, because you'll notice as we move through that they change slightly in terms of angle of view. So we need to make sure that all the important parts of the picture are aligned. So we select the first one, go down to the last one, select the last one, then go up to Edit, and we go down to Auto Align Layers. Click Auto for the option, then click OK. let Photoshop go off and make adjustments to each of the layers in order to get the visual parts or the picture parts all aligned together. So you'll notice as we move down the image sequence now that there's slight changes in terms of the size and the shape of the image, but all the image parts are all lined up together. Now, whilst all of these layers are selected now, we can go into the next part of the process, which is down to auto blend layers, and this is where the magic happens. Notice we've got two options here. One is for blending a panorama, where we're stitching side by side images, and one is for blending stacked images like we have here for doing depth of field manipulation. So we'll click OK and let Photoshop start the blending process. Now, depending on the size of the source images and the number of images that you have, that process may take a little time. Let's look at the results here. So this is the after image, and if I hit Control or Command Z, there's the before image of the first shot. And you'll notice we now have sharpness from the foreground all the way through to the background. If we have a look at the layers palette, you'll see that Photoshop has very cleverly created pixel-based layers, masks of each of the images, isolating just the sharp portions and stitching those together. There is some transparent areas around the edge that results from the alignment process, so we can just easily grab a crop tool, double click on that, and it will actually apply the crop, removing any of the transparent parts, giving us an image with maximum depth of field without the need to actually use a high aperture number. One of the biggest changes in Photoshop CS4 might at first seem to be just an extra palette that you can use when adjusting your images. And if we actually have a look at it now, it's called the Adjustments pane or Adjustments palette. And it looks like just a collection of all of the adjustments, layers, entries that we would normally find underneath the layer menu. But it represents a significant change in the way in which we go about making adjustments to our image. For instance, if we just look at the entries that we have here to start with, we have the brightness, contrast, we have levels, curves, and exposure. All of these four adjustments are essentially tonal controls. We then have vibrance, which you'll remember is a slider control inside Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, and works on desaturated or pastel colors rather than the saturated ones that you would normally find with saturation control. And then we have hue saturation, we have color balance, black and white, photo filter, and channel mixer. All of those are essentially color or hue controls. And then we have selective color, gradient map, threshold, posterize, and invert. Now, as well as these actual adjustment options or styles, we also have a bunch of presets that we can actually apply with any of these controls. For instance, with the levels preset, we have one called darker. If we click on the darker preset, automatically a darker change will be applied to our image, and you'll see we've flipped into the levels adjustment. What would have been dialog but now sits within this adjustment palette here. And we can make the same kind of changes that we would normally make using the levels dialog in this palette here. We can flick back to the list of adjustments by just clicking on the arrow, and we can select another adjustment. Say for instance if we wish to make a curves change as well, and we can jump in and make our curves change directly to the image just as you would normally. But look what happens when we look in the layers palette. Both of those two changes that we've just made are reflected in new layer entries, adjustment layer entries in our image here. If we go back to the adjustments or click on one of these and go back to each of these layers, you will see that the changes and the settings that we've used for each of these adjustment layers are actually sitting there. So we can work from one to the other, so we can work between the levels adjustment and the curves adjustment by just clicking on those entries and making those adjustments. We don't have to apply any of the adjustments, they're being applied automatically and updating our preview. And because they're being applied via adjustment layers, say for instance if we wanted to do a convert to black and white and we wanted to say tint that but only have one part of the image that's tinted, we could then go back to the layer itself, click on the mask associated with that layer, adjustment layer, and we'll just go in and we will invert that mask, or sorry, we'll fill it with black. So we'll go in and select black, click OK. So we've restricted or hidden the change that we've just made, or hidden the effects of that adjustment layer. We can now go in and just grab the brush tool, make sure that we have white selected as our foreground color, and you can paint on the adjustment directly to the image itself. So here we're painting back the sepia tone look to the bike by just simply masking out the rest of the adjustment and just applying the change to the bike itself. So it's a very quick and easy way for us to make adjustments and to make them non-destructively and to apply them in such a way that we can come back and make changes to them at any time using the new adjustments palette. Alongside the new tools and features that are found in CS4, the Adobe guys have actually revamped some of the existing tools and features to provide extra functionality or customize or fine-tune the way they work to suit the modern workflow. For instance, if we have a look at the dodge and burn and sponge tools, you'll see some changes here that, although they may appear to be just small changes, will actually work and help you work with these tools in a much more productive way than we've had before. For instance, both the burn and dodge tool now have a protect tones option up in the options bar. When you're working with these tools, this helps you protect the tones that you're actually burning in or dodging from clipping, which was one of the difficulties or primary problems with this tool in previous versions. So by selecting the protect tones option, when you're actually burning in things like shadows and highlights and midtones, it actually helps to protect those tones from being clipped, in other words being converted to pure black or pure white. So there's the emphasis on darkening in this instance, or lightening if you're using the dodge tool, the tones, without actually pushing them all the way to textureless pure black or pure white. So that's very handy, and it means that using the tool is a lot less destructive than what we've had before. The change to the sponge tool is the fact that we have a vibrance control here. And remember, vibrance is different to saturation because it affects the pastel tones or pastel hues, or those colors in the image that are less saturated, and tends to not work on or not work as strongly on the colors in the image that are already saturated. So for instance, if we work on saturating this particular image here, working over these more subtle colors in the background, you can see that it's just saturating those areas. If we go to desaturate and make sure that vibrance is still selected, and we work over the, notice even if I work over the really saturated parts of the image, we're not getting desaturation happening there or conversion to grayscale. We're actually getting desaturation just occurring in those areas where there wasn't much color in the first place. If we work on the base here as well, a similar kind of thing occurs. So by selecting the vibrance control for the sponge tool, you tend to concentrate any changes that you make on just those pastel areas and not those areas of the image that are already saturated. Let's now look at one other tool or feature that has been changed for CS4 as well. I'm just going to select this portion of the image here and just zoom in to that area, and then we'll go to the select and down to color range feature. Now the color range feature has been present in the last few editions of Photoshop, but in this particular one we have a new option called localized color clusters. So if we actually go and select part of the image here, you'll see that we can select just where this color is actually working or being displayed in the image. If however we go and select localized color clusters and go to the addition or the plus eyedropper, we can then go and select other color options or other color ranges to be included as well. So now we've managed to include part of the face and the lips and also these hearts on the cheeks. So localized color clusters are a great addition to the color range because it means that you can actually select different color ranges using the color range selection eyedroppers.